In the spirit of the Jesuit practice of composition of place, we acknowledge that Gonzaga University resides on the homelands of the Spokane tribal people. This land holds the cultural DNA and the spirit of the first people of this place, the people of the river. It is their ancestors who are here and bring forth the power of this place, the knowledge that comes from the land. We are grateful to be on this land and ask for its support as we work to manifest our intentions during this gathering of hearts, minds, and spirits.
Hello, Gonzaga community. I'm so excited to have you all join us here today. My name is Angela Jones, and I am a 2016 graduate of Gonzaga School of Law from the first accelerated cohort. And I'm humbled and honored to get this opportunity to moderate today's town hall. And I lived in Spokane for about 21 years, raising my family there and working there, and now reside in Seattle, Washington, where I serve as the CEO of Washington STEM. But Spokane played such an integral part of my life that being part of the Gonzaga family remains important to me. And so very willing to give my time today. I also wear the hat as a managing partner and founder of the Black Future Co-op Fund, which is the fund that helps to connect Black communities across the state of Washington and build a financial infrastructure, economic and power infrastructure, and educational infrastructure for Black communities by Black communities. So, and also have to mention that I am a former member of the Gonzaga BSU, might have been the oldest member of the Gonzaga BSU when I was in law school in my 40s. Before I introduce the panelists, though, I wanted to offer a prayer, and I also wanted to share a scripture. About just over a year ago, on December 1st, 2019, Gonzaga shared a blog post that I wrote as a graduate called All You Need Is Love. And it was talking about love being the thing that connects us all, love that's built from our faith, love that's built from the reason we chose to attend and work at Gonzaga. And that stands true today. I just read it today as I was preparing for this. And so the verse I want to share is Romans 15:1-7. We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not please ourselves. Let us each please his neighbor for his good to build him up. For Christ did not please himself, but it is as it is written, the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. For whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope. May the God of endurance and encouragement grant you to live in such harmony with one another, in accord with Christ Jesus, that together you may with one voice glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God. And so I ask briefly for bowed heads and humbled hearts. Lord, we are so grateful for this space tonight to gather together and discuss concerns, discuss the harm our students have endured, but to not stop there. We thank you in advance for the ability to have the wisdom and the knowledge to be able to move forward in harmony, to build bridges, build relationships as a strong campus community. We welcome you in here tonight as we bring our authentic hearts, authentic minds, our faith into this space. Not only are you welcome here, you are needed. In your name we pray, amen. So again, welcome, almost 400 of you in here tonight, and probably more coming in as we go. This is one of 2 town hall webinars planned at the request of the Black Student Union. And we're here specifically to discuss the November 8th attack on the BSU, the hate crime that occurred via Zoom that targeted them during their meeting, as well as other issues of racism, diversity, and inclusion on Gonzaga's campus. And we come together in the spirit as a family, students, faculty, staff, alumni, parents, leadership, donors, to figure out how do we uncover together the ways to respond with strength and support our targeted students and the entirety of our community. I thank the students for their courage during such challenging times. And I thank Gonzaga leadership for your willingness to be on this panel and answer the questions that the students are posing. How we move together is when we can bridge gaps, as I know all are working hard. So let me start by introducing the panel. First, Dr. Thane McCullough, president of Gonzaga University, is with us tonight, and you'll hear from him in a few moments. Dr. Dina Gonzalez, provost and senior vice president. Dr. Raymond Reyes, associate provost and chief diversity officer. Dr. Kent Porterfield, vice provost for student affairs. Becky Wilkie, director, campus safety and security. And Philip Tyler, crime prevention and education officer of campus safety and security. And we have some other folks on the screen here. You can see, even though their boxes are black, Dr. Robin Kelly, associate chief diversity officer. Joan Iva Fawcett, assistant dean, diversity, inclusion, community, and equity, otherwise known as DICE. And you can see that we've got some IT support there with Eric Moss, as well as Richard Rasmussen and Lisa Corleano. So thank you so much for all of you for being here. This is a space where I'm hoping we can engage in authentic dialogue, bringing your hearts and your minds. So let me set the ground rules briefly. So following introductory comments from President McCullough, the majority of our time will actually be spent with the panelists answering the questions that were posed by the Black Student Union leadership. We'll also dedicate some time after the questions. For all of you, you can use the Q&A function that you should be able to see on your screen to direct a question to the panel. If you're directing it to someone specifically, please name the person that you're hoping will answer that question. We'll take questions until about 6:15. Please also know that the webinar is being recorded. You should be able to see on your upper left-hand side the red recording button, and this will be posted to Gonzaga's website at www.gonzaga.edu/BSU response, and it will be posted by Wednesday. I think, Eric, if we've got that on the screen. Yep, there it is. And we also have an Instagram, Gonzaga's diversity Instagram account. So the other thing to note is it's likely we're going to run out of time because we have a lot of things to discuss. And please know that if you put a question in the Q&A, Gonzaga still intends to address your questions, and those responses will also be posted to that website that I just mentioned. It's also important to note that if there are students who are impacted by the event who'd like to speak to a counselor, please call area code 509-313-2227 and a case manager can assist you. And I'm going to repeat that one more time. Area code 509-313-2227. 2020 has been a tough year. And so it's a strength to reach out to someone when you need help or just want to talk to someone. I know I don't have to remind everyone of the importance of respectful dialogue and conversation. That also includes how you pose your questions in the chat. We want to make sure that we're enlightening, informing, and leading towards understanding and quite frankly towards action. What comes after this. And so with that, I think I've set enough rules for all of you tonight. With that, I would like to turn the microphone over to President McCullough for some remarks.
Thank you very much, Angela. And as we begin the town hall, I have prepared and would like to share just a few opening comments. I do want to begin by recognizing and thanking Angela for your willingness to serve as our moderator this evening. And I also want to thank my fellow panelists and colleagues, and to all those who are joining this evening. This is a community of concern, and I am very, very grateful to all of you for being here. But in a particular way, I want to express my thanks to the members of the Gonzaga BSU and to BSU President Faith Guy for your courage and your determination to engage in this town hall, and also your commitment to holding your university administration and community accountable. The event that brought us most directly here today was a hate-filled attack. It was vicious, it was deeply racist, and when I learned about it late in the afternoon on Sunday, November 8th, I was horrified. It was a calculated, coordinated incident which intentionally sought to harm our Black students at Gonzaga University, and it did so. To the BSU students who were directly impacted in the attack, and to all those affected by this incident, I want to express my apologies to you. We as university did not do enough to anticipate how the vulnerabilities of technology might be exploited by those with a motivation to do harm. And in turn, you were subjected to a terrifying and disgusting display of racially fueled hatred. For this, I truly am sorry. And I want to personally assure you that we will continue to support every effort that is currently being made by our own staff and by those in law enforcement to identify the perpetrators of these acts with consequences commensurate with the violation of our community standards, which, as we have said, includes expulsion. This type of violating behavior has no place in the Gonzaga community. I was deeply disturbed by the thought that this attack might have been perpetrated by GU students against their fellow students. But just as quickly, I recognized why this could be the case, why students might believe that it was the case. The issues we will discuss and touch upon today are born not only out of this incident, but out of the cumulative experiences of BIPOC students, staff, faculty, and alums at Gonzaga University over time. These are experiences that have resulted in feelings of not feeling safe and of not being equally valued or seen or heard. As Angela said, 2020 has been a particularly difficult year. It's been difficult with the events that were catalyzed by the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many other unarmed Black people at the hands of law enforcement officers. The disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 on Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the incidents of bias and hate that have happened right here across time on our own campus. The Zoom attack against BSU is the latest triggering event and yet another reminder that our efforts at Gonzaga to protect and support our students, while well-intentioned, have simply not been enough. Gonzaga University is, and throughout its history, has been a predominantly white institution. We have intentionally worked over the past 2 decades to become a more diverse institution, to become a more inclusive university. Efforts have been made to increase resources for the support of BIPOC students, to expand training for employees, and to increase diversity offerings in the curriculum. But this incident, as well as previous incidents impacting historically underrepresented students, staff, and faculty, have underscored the reality that we have much more work to do if we are to become a truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive institution. Issues of race and racism are difficult issues for most people, and I would say Americans in particular. The history books tend to ignore and deny loathsome and horrific crimes that have been perpetrated across centuries on this continent against Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. Facing and grappling with the naked truth of not only our own history, but the racism that has been deeply welded into the institutional expressions of a white-dominated cultural narrative is essential if white people are to truly begin understanding what the experience of being, of living, of surviving as a person of color in America today can mean and often involves. I am deeply conscious of my own privilege as a white male. As I say, we at Gonzaga have much more to do if we are to live into the work of becoming a truly inclusive community. All of us live in the US society that has long advantaged white people. And in so doing, we have absorbed the implicit bias that comes with this type of privilege. We have, whether we know it or not, accepted certain attitudes, beliefs, and ideas. And the harsh reality is we now must surface them, come to understand, and to learn and relearn if we are to eradicate anti-Black racism and other forms of discrimination that do exist here in Spokane and here at Gonzaga. I don't believe that we can be successful if we do not undertake the work of examining privileged identity, which includes learning how to recognize and disrupt defensive mechanisms, denial, deflection, minimization, rationalization, and false benevolence. They often show up when privilege is challenged. We often do not recognize these behaviors, but we use them routinely to do things like interrupting conversations and interactions across difference. And this in turn prevents us from really communicating and making the progress that we need to make. So to those of us who identify as white, I say perhaps the greatest challenge we face to advancing racial justice at Gonzaga is us. Our difficulty sitting with discomfort, listening to BIPOC stories without judgment or tone policing, admitting that we don't know what we don't know, and instead committing ourselves to continuous self-examination and action. Tonight, we've come together to respond to the question BSU students and others whose voices wish to be heard. For the shortcomings that do exist at Gonzaga and which have manifested themselves in this incident, I do wish to apologize. I also want you to know and truly believe, together with my colleagues, that we see you, we want to hear you, and I am committed to using my own positional power to push Gonzaga harder in the quest for racial justice. So with that, I'll turn the mic back over to our moderator and look forward, together with my colleagues, to responding to your questions.
Thank you so much, President McCullough. I appreciate you taking that time to share that important perspective. For the audience, just a reminder that the Q&A will take questions through the Q&A function until 6:15. That will give us some time to be able to get those questions, in a way that I can see them and pose them to some of the panelists. And so for the panelists, I think we'll go ahead and jump right in. And, I do want to track time. And so I am going to be that timekeeper that may ask you to wrap up your thoughts so that we can get to the questions. For those in the audience, the Black Student Union leadership actually crafted 8 to 9 questions for the panelists and shared those questions with myself and the panelists late last night. So there should be no questions nobody here is familiar with at this point. So I'm going to pose this question, and you all can decide. All of you don't have to answer this question, but if you feel compelled, and there are times I may call on some of you directly. So the first question is, what is the process when a hate crime is committed on the Gonzaga campus?
I think I'll go ahead and start. Again, this is Becky Wilkie, Director of Campus Security. I'm going to rely on my partner, Philip Tyler, as well on this. When a hate crime is committed on campus, or even to our off-campus community for that matter, we encourage and expect the affected people and or the witnesses that to the incident, to report it to campus security immediately so we can investigate. Obviously, if you are in imminent danger, we want you to call 911, then campus security if you can. We utilize all resources available to us to investigate these incidents, including and especially our external law enforcement partners. If a hate incident does occur and we do the initial investigation, there's usually always follow-up the next day or two to check in, make sure the students have received the support that they need, not just from campus security, but from other departments across campus, such as Cure Personalis, Counseling Center. And then sometimes when a hate or bias event happens, it's not necessarily reported to campus security directly, but rather to an online bias report or directly to the bias team. I'll probably defer to you, Raymond, on the bias reporting aspect. And Philip, do you have anything to add?
I would just add, and thank you, Becky, for sharing that, that on the instance that we are notified, we being campus security and public safety, of a crime, particularly a hate crime that's impacting our students, we will train all of our resources, including our visual surveillance technology, to make sure those areas that might have been affected, let's say it's outside of a dormitory or in a common space, such as the Say Her Name Memorial, that we are training our cameras there to ensure that that doesn't happen again, and perpetrators can't use that space to then affect any more crimes that are impacting our students.
I have a follow-up question specific to the November 8th and specific to something you mentioned, Becky, that you may not be directly notified. I guess, what is the point when it's determined it should come your way? Because it's, I think one of the concerns as I met with the BSU is that there was a gap in communication. So when do they notify you?
Yeah. This specific incident from the Zoom incident attack on our BSU students, they called us and we thought that we were getting information directly from a participant, but that wasn't the case. So that's where the first gap of communication happened. We could have done better. We should have dug a little deeper on that. This was a very emotional event, a very happening right now event, and students know they can call 313-2222 to report anything, or at least to get some resources. Sometimes the bias or a hate incident is a little bit more latent, or people start thinking about something that happened to them and realize, I really should probably report this to somebody even though it happened last week. Even our campus staff and faculty have the ability to go online and report for a student. And those online reports don't come to campus security. They go to a specific bias team. And sometimes the reporting party wants to remain anonymous. So we don't really get involved in the investigative part until a bias team member reaches out to us and say, hey, this needs to be followed up on.
Okay, thanks for that. And Dr. Reyes, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything more. Becky had mentioned your name in terms of the bias team.
I think it's important to make a distinction between a hate crime and bias incident. They're both heinous, but one is breaking the law. The other one may or may not be a violation of law or policies or procedures. So I think I'm assuming that Phil probably in his work for prevention makes the distinction between a hate crime and bias. So if in doubt, call campus security and go for the assumption of a higher level of offense, a hate crime. Because as Becky said, the bias team is more latent in terms of there's no time sensitivity. Somebody could report something that happened a week ago or 5 days ago. The idea of the bias team is prevention and education and archival. It doesn't have any enforcement, regulatory, or investigative powers. It's intended to be an opportunity for this community to walk the talk of pure personalis and be able to take co-responsibility for co-contributing to a safe campus environment by, if you see it, report it. And so we can't respond to something that we don't know about. So the bias team is more preventive, more educational and supportive of both the, of all the involved parties. In fact, we don't even use language like perpetrator or victim or any of that. It's more involved parties. Whereas the hate crime, you definitely have to call 2222, that's the extension, and or the police. So that's the distinction.
Okay, I appreciate that. And that actually delves into the next question. And President McCullough, you mentioned this, you alluded to this in your opening remarks, that there have been things happening across the country on other college campuses where, other meetings were being Zoom bombed on other college campuses, hate crimes. And so, the question from the students is, why were faculty and staff and students not warned about the possibility ahead of time? And then, for you all, hindsight being 2020, are there things now that have changed? So the first question, why wasn't there something active happening when you knew that was happening on other campuses? And then is there something different now that this has happened here at Gonzaga? And that's for anyone.
Angela, do you want me to respond initially?
Sure, President Combs, if you like.
Okay, so this is definitely, speaking for myself alone, a hindsight is 2020 situation, because that same afternoon as the attack, I went online to just try to do some self-education around what this might be and whether it had, I didn't even know the term Zoom bombing. And I say this because now, having quickly gathered information around not only the fact that it does occur, but the fact that Zoom as a specific example of a tech platform has been exploited in this way across time. I personally wish that I had known more and had greater awareness earlier, because I think when we have information, we generally tend to be pretty good about passing information on to colleagues to try to say, look, this might be a phenomenon that we need to look at. We learned in retrospect that not only other organizations and not even just universities, but school systems and other entities have been similarly attacked. So as soon as we realized what had occurred, we did try to move quickly. We did try to communicate with our clubs and organizations and make sure that people were aware that effectively a public meeting could be subjected to this type of attack. And I will share that, this has been one of the very human realities that has been a challenge for us in a variety of ways. So much of our time and energy and attention as institution has been focused on really trying to attend to the issues that have been surfaced by COVID, that we probably were not as more broadly aware of some of the things that clearly other institutions were experiencing or seeing as we might otherwise have been. So that was definitely one of the things that we identified early and quickly. And I do wish that that we had known, or that more had been done by those who might have known.
Appreciate that, President McCullough. Anyone else that'd like to add to that?
Angela, I might jump in. Oh, go ahead, Dina.
That's okay. You want to go first? I can follow.
I was just going to say, I think in April, ITS sent out on 3 different occasions some information about security for Zoom, but where I think we really dropped the ball is that it didn't happen again coming into the fall. So I don't know if we got a little lulled to sleep or what happened. The other thing is that it was that communication is sent out through morning mail, and I'm not sure if that's a communication vehicle that reaches students as effectively as some other things. And so my regret is in student affairs that we didn't pick up on that, and one, that we didn't try to find other ways to communicate that, because there is some relatively simple guidance that can protect organizations, and ITS has now actually even set some additional security that I think is helpful. But the reality is that we didn't carry that same sort of precautionary guidance into the fall in the way that we probably should have.
Kent, is morning mail a daily email that goes out to the campus? Or?
It does. And I think students do read it, but I don't think it's the communication vehicle that reaches students in the best way.
You're going to have to make a TikTok. Dr. Gonzalez, I think you wanted to add.
Thank you. Yes, for the opportunity to follow up with this, because I did a little bit of work this afternoon in preparation and thinking through the lessons learned. Not that I want to be so fast to jump to lessons, but because I think we do need to reside for a bit of time in what happened and how we can remedy, as Dr. McCullough has done, we can remedy via what we've learned. But ITS did report that about 20% of our students have taken the cybersecurity course that was offered. And what happened there is that COVID-19 interrupted that cybersecurity training for all of us. Faculty, staff, administrators were all supposed to have taken this. And what is helpful about that, again, is that I think it just creates an alertness in our minds about what kind of climate we live in, and how people globally now, internationally, can zoom in and enter the spaces that we create. And so we need to be very vigilant. And I think that will pick up where it left off. And I think because of this, all the more urgency to ensure that at least safety in the technological world, in the virtual world, in that space for our students is assured, because I just don't think our students should have to be worrying along with many other things about how their own information or their own participation in something might be compromised.
And that's something even tonight that, we had to think about. How do we set this up? This is a difficult topic. How do we set this up in this space to have authentic conversation and also not get Zoom bombed and all of the things that could potentially happen? So thank you so much for your responses to that.
Angela, could I add real quick?
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Philip.
I think it's very important, specifically for the reason why we're here, that this has not been, nor was it the fault of the BSU. Whether they missed a morning email, whether they missed morning mail, these individuals that perpetrated this crime are the problem. And we are working diligently now to ensure that they will not be a problem in the future. But I want our students to know, particularly our BSU students, that this was not your fault. Whether you missed an email, whether you missed a check block, this should not have happened to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for stating that, Philip. I appreciate that. So I want to move on to the next question. I'm watching the clock while just like deep into the dialogue and your responses. But the next question that students are posing is, what is your definition of solidarity? What does that sound like to each of you? Go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez.
I think this is such an important question, and I want to thank the students in BSU for constructing it and posing it. because it is something that sometimes people, especially people of color, we often think of this as part of the discourse of the 1970s and 80s, particularly when the wars were going on in Central America. And we stood in solidarity with the people of El Salvador and Nicaragua. I think that, solidarity stretches back most certainly in this country into the 19th century and even in the 18th century, when many people stood in solidarity with native peoples as they were being eliminated or removed. And as an historian, sometimes I tend to think of these things around the long term as well as the shorter term. So from the 70s forward, for me, it certainly means in a Jesuit environment, picking up the piece that has to do with cura personalis, that has to do with care of the whole person, but that also has to do with thinking of the world in the way that others might imagine it, in a way that is new to one, in a way that seeks places and gaps in understanding and acknowledges those gaps in understanding. It can be psychic, it can be religious, it can be spiritual, and it can also be intensely political, as it was for me in the 1970s. We have seen hate crimes, we've seen criminal behavior, we have seen across the ages countries and governments and military forces participate in all manner of crime against humanity. And many brave people have stood in a line of fire against those crimes. And so what I bring to the concept of solidarity is a sense of belonging and being and standing against anything that makes another human being feel lesser than or invisible or marginalized. And I found that even in the Catholic Church through liberation theology, picked up that theme and introduced and helped my understanding of it as events unfolded that were kind of unimaginable. So I have even tried to walk in the hands of elected officials with whom I could not disagree more, and in some cases dislike intensely. But I have tried to think through in my own solidarity what it is like for them and what it would be like to be them. So that's what it means for me.
As you all, as those of you, decide to jump in and answer this question, I want to push it a step further and say, okay, what is your meaning? And do you believe, how you've responded to this incident, does it match up to the meaning? If it doesn't, how will you take that step forward?
Yeah, Angela, I would first state that, solidarity is one of those words like ally. And as you and I were raised, you would understand that just because you show up in the right place doesn't mean you come with the right attitude. Or as our parents would tell us, just because you stand in the garage doesn't make you a car. So the defining solidarity is empathy plus community together equals solidarity. Empathy being understanding what someone is going through or experiencing without passing your own judgment or your perceptions on that. Community being making sure that my brother and sister's problems are my problems too, and we help solve them together. That brings us together for solidarity. We can't just say the word and be in solidarity. We can't simply send out an email and say we're in solidarity. Solidarity is that action that is borne out over time.
I could add to that. I agree wholeheartedly that it's a verb and a noun. And related to what happened on November the 8th, as I was listening to Dr. Gonzalez, my heart got sad because I realized it takes relationship as a beginning point to understand common interest and common purpose and mutual support. Those are the ingredients of solidarity, whether you think it's a verb or a noun, but it's about relationship. And we've got a long ways to go with the Black Student Union, in terms of healing the relationship and earning the trust. And as Phil said earlier, what happened is no responsibility or the fault of the students at all. but rather figuring out how can we have mutual support? How can we be partners in realizing that we have common ground and common purpose? But first we have to face the things that haven't occurred, the gap between what is versus what should be. But I do believe that it is about action. It is about relationship. And I think ultimately it's about the goal that we want. Out of one of the goals that we want out of this town hall is that we can begin to have the baby steps towards solidarity with students that want to make us accountable. We need to be held accountable and figure out together as partners, how can we work towards that common purpose?
Thanks for your authentic response there, Dr. Reyes. Would anybody else like to respond to that question?
Angela, this is Kent. I kind of like the Ignatian Solidarity Network's definition. They really talk about prophetic resistance, and there's two parts to that. And this is where I think the students are really speaking to us. And I think this event is an inflection point to some extent. You know, it's a point along a continuum of experiences, and I think it's important not to lose sight of that. But the first thing that this sort of prophetic resistance is about is really naming the injustice and breaking down the systems that create it. And I think our students are saying loud and clear that sometimes we might name it, but we don't break down the systems necessarily that create it. The second part of that, though, is that coming together, right? It's that bringing us together part of it, where we begin to do that sometimes too slow, but that steady work that we have to do together to create a new system. And I think our students are asking us to not only disrupt the system, but to be more actively engaged in creating a new system. And to me, that's what solidarity is about. It's not just with and for others. And that's what we break it down to sometimes, but it's more complex than that, I think.
President McCullough?
I'll be brief. I agree with everything that's been said here. I guess, you know, for me personally, I identify the term with perhaps another era, and that has to do with just where I happen to be in relationship to that period of time. But very much this concept of coming together to be with and support, but also that there's this dynamic of working to come together and working up against established structures that are oppressing, because you know, many of the issues that individuals who are being oppressed and who are seeking relief and change struggle with are in some cases they're deathly. They have immense consequences for the individual, for their welfare, for communities of people. And so to come together and kind of unite in relationship, in common cause, but up against those structures that oppress, to me, is what connotes solidarity and working in solidarity with others. So that to me very much is tied and connected with a number of the observations that colleagues here have made.
Thank you.
Angela, can I just do like 30 seconds? I think this is important. You know, I echo the panelists, but I think the first step in it is recognizing that there is a real problem here with systemic racial inequities. And I think that's the first step. And I think there's probably people in the audience who want to be part of this group, this common group, have solidarity. But if you don't have those hard conversations and you're not willing to be wrong or respect the Black life's experience, I think that's just really, really important for people to know. You have to have those uncomfortable conversations, and you have to really dig in if you want to be a partner and with that common goal of sustainable change.
A few of you have touched on, this is really hard to be be the moderator and not be able to be a part of this dialogue. So I'm going to throw one in while I've got the mic. I've heard each of you talk about some type of how do we co-design the community that we are trying to build with your students, instead of doing it to students, to be able to allow them to participate in building what they need. And so that's something that I would definitely challenge you all to think about, what co-creation looks like to build the Gonzaga we're all hoping for. So, you know, as mentioned earlier, and I know President McCauley, you had mentioned this as well in your opening remarks, is, you know, hate crimes are not new. They've been experienced by Gonzaga students in several incidents across decades. When I hosted a Zoom, sort of this mini reunion of Black students at Gonzaga, there were many of them, and some of them I know are in the audience tonight, who things happened to, whether they were law students who got something in their backpacks, or Black leaders on campus who got direct threats. So it's not new. And so this question is probably for Drs. Gonzalez, Reyes, or Porterfield. You know, how do you perceive your responsibility to protect and preserve the emotional well-being of your students of color? And Dr. Reyes, you and I had really spoken briefly about, you know, like, why does it take so long to get counselors of color, for example? And so if you can talk about, you know, that, you know, how we're taking care of the emotional well-being, that would be great. Any of you.
I'm wondering, Kent, if you would like to speak to the hiring of the therapist of color and that process as it's moved along, and also the position that's available in the search underway. Taking into account, again, this, you know, in the information and looking at the student body and student needs, but also specifically Black students on campus.
Yeah, so I think, let me go back to Angela, something I think you were asking, which is, first, let me just say that we have had some success here of late, identifying 2 counselors that we will contract with for now. Both identify as people of color. I believe one identifies as biracial and one identifies as African-American or Black, both local. While we are searching for a full-time counselor, so we'll maintain the services, and we might have the possibility of identifying a third. So the question then really becomes, why is it taking so long? And I think that's the question that students want. So I remember the first conversation I had with Faith was this summer, and this issue came up, and it came up again in a conversation that Faith and other BSU students had with Thane and I. And we did start that work, but the reality is when this happened, we moved at warp speed. And I think the question that students have is, why does it take something like this for us to do that? You know, and I think it's really a fair question. And I've tried to reflect on that, because we've had, I want to give Eric Baldwin a lot of credit, as well as Faith and Terry Graham, who've come together to really make this happen. And we've also now started to identify the potential to hire a case manager who also identifies as a person of color. So what it reinforces to me is this, that if we are committed to this and we set our minds to this and we make those resources available, we can do this. And I understand that Spokane is not the most racially diverse place on earth, but the reality is that we have to examine what it is that does hold us back, what excuses we do make. And I don't have a good excuse for that. The truth of the matter is I've been here 4 months, and we moved more in the last 3 weeks on this issue than we did prior to that. That's on me. And that's something that I have to take stock of and reflect on. But we, now we have a group that also in student affairs that is looking at all of our hiring practices, kind of I call it a pilot group, maybe our student engagement group that's already looking at that. And we will appoint a group that will look at this across the entire division. But what I really feel good about is that we didn't wait, that we dived in to act first. And I think we have a tendency sometimes to plan, and the air goes out of the balloon. We lose the momentum. So I do think it's my responsibility to listen to the stories of Black, Indigenous students of color. I think it's my responsibility to hear the stories. I listened to the Act 6 senior reflections the other night. They're hard to hear because the students came with an experience that they expected and they didn't necessarily have that experience. That's hard to hear. And those are things that we have to take stock of and take seriously. I do think it's my responsibility to sit there, however uncomfortable that might be, to hear that story. And to think about campus climate more broadly than just student affairs. So at least for us in student affairs, we've realized that we've got some capacity building to do, knowledge and skill building. So whether that is requiring diversity EDU, which we're doing, intercultural development inventory, which we're doing, intercultural conflict style inventory, but all of those are just tools, right, to identify where our gaps are so that we can stand up some solutions that will change the way we look, the composition of our team, and the way we act.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Well, I agree with everything I've heard. I think it's got to be personal. I think at a predominantly white institution, you have to be more intentional about being aware of who is most at risk in this community. And so, you know, as for example, as a father, I've got 3 children, and I'm very protective and I want to preserve their safety. Safety is a fundamental basic human need and desire. I mean, you look at a young little baby. I've become a grandfather, and you know, when the child puts his, you put your finger like this out, like this, child immediately just grabs and holds on. Wants connection, wants belongingness, you know? And so we have to be vigilant. What gets attention gets done. And some of us are better at that than others, but we have to systematize that as muscle memory. And as Kent is saying, we can do all these programs and all these initiatives and, you know, live in our, you know, check up from the neck up, live in the head. But really it's about relationship. It's about trying to make sure that we are our sister and brother's keeper, and that there is this horizontal, you know, looking to your left and looking to your right, and figuring out where are the vulnerabilities. Is it late at night, walking in between buildings, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, really looking at protection and preservation of a person's personhood in different ways, more than just campus security. We have to really begin thinking about, it is a cultural shift of the climate, and how can we get to 71%? This is not always about the historically underrepresented. Let's remember the 71, 72%, the allies earlier referenced by Phil. But how do we authenticate that partnership, going back to that word solidarity again, particularly in the area of a basic fundamental human need, safety, to feel safe.
So that's actually a great segue to the next question that the students posed, and it's regarding Black Lives Matter. And so the question as posed is, Gonzaga continually capitalizes on Black individuals. As such, this institution should commit to their protection. Do you perceive a threat to Black lives on campus? And do you believe that Black lives matter?
I'd love to start off with that response, Angela. And I would start like this. Black Lives Matter, the organization, was founded in 2013. It's December 7th, 2020. And I want to remind our audience out there, and I'll look deeply into the camera. Black lives still matter in 2020. And I'm not talking about the organization. I'm not talking about the movement. I'm not talking about the hashtag you can put across your website periodically to show solidarity. I'm talking about the actual lives of these BSU students, the actual lives of these Black students who want to simply thrive and exist on campus. So yes, Black lives matter. We were born Black. We're going to die Black. We just don't want to die because we're Black. And how we make sure that our students are safe on campus is we do the work ahead of time, proactive work, not reactive work. And I say that because campus security, particularly my department, headed up by Becky Wilkie, we made sure we reached out to our Black students, our international students, our queer students, after the incidents that occurred, starting from Kennedy to the Say Her Names mural, to simply ask them, and listen to their voices. How are you feeling? How can we better serve you? Because look, let's be honest, partnering with a group during a period of time is what's expected. Putting in the work ahead of that incident is how you build relationship. Trustworthiness comes before trust. And that's what we're trying to do here at Campus Security. And that's what the broader university is trying to do.
I think this is a question I think the students would love to hear from most, if not all of you on.
Sure. Angela, to answer the question from my perspective, I mean, this incident is just one of a number of incidents over time that I've borne witness to that make clear that our Black students, our students of color, they are at risk and they are threatened and they do not feel safe. And we can have all kinds of discussions about alternative theories of what might be happening, but it doesn't change the fundamental fact that when one of our students tells me that they aren't leaving their house for fear that something is going to happen to them on their way between where they live off campus and our campus, or that possibly something will happen to them once they're on campus. It is a measure of the lack of safety and security and a sense of well-being that they're reflecting in those comments. So this is, for me, the core issue of why it is absolutely essential that we aren't only here tonight having this discussion, but that with that comes a commitment to work actively, just as Phil was mentioning, to not only try to run really fast to catch up, but now work together and begin to really think through how to anticipate. But while I realize these are interconnected elements of a question, I am absolutely committed to the concept that the Black Lives Matter movement was founded upon, and the belief in the concept that Black Lives Matter, and have a deep belief that this is something that as a university community, there are many people, many colleagues, many faculty and staff colleagues, as well as many students who also truly support and believe is an important concept for us as an institution. Whether or not we create the opportunities for a full, deep appreciation and awareness of what that means, so that it doesn't just live as a catchphrase, but really begins to animate people's understanding of what is behind that, is an important question. And I have to give credit to colleagues within the College of Arts and Sciences who have made a distinct and concerted effort to bring individuals to our campus who actually represent the founders of movements like Black Lives Matter, so that deepening of awareness and the significance is something that people have an opportunity to gain in terms of appreciation. So speaking for myself, speaking on behalf of our administration and the ways in which we have endeavored to claim the importance of this issue, Black lives absolutely matter. And we are going to continue to work to find ways of reflecting that on an ongoing basis.
I could add to that. Our office, the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, was a partner in bringing Patrice Cullors interestingly enough, that one of the last live speakers we had, February 20th, 2020, before the campus shut down because of the pandemic. And one of the things I had dinner with her, and one of the things that we talked about was this idea of how do you walk the talk? How do you translate rhetoric into reality? How do you embody the behavior? And one of the things that she touched upon was the old Emerson line, I can't hear your words over the loud roar of your actions. So that's I think, our challenge and opportunity. And that's how ultimately we're going to garner trust. It goes back to that fundamental trust that students need to have, I feel, in the community, that they can trust this community, that they will act in accordance with the rhetoric of Black Lives Matter. And we still have to kind of unpack that in a practical way and get out of the ethers, high up the abstraction ladder, and really authenticate it in terms of what we do 365 days out of the year, not a one and done or waiting until a critical incident occurs before we chant the mantra. And I think that's our challenge and our opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Reyes. Go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez.
Yes, thanks again to the students who posed this question. And I noticed that you have at the beginning of it too, the fetishization of Black individuals, the stars, the folks who kind of end up on the pictures and on the covers of things and so on. And you're equating that absolutely, I think, appropriately and powerfully to the idea of the safety, the issue of safety, but also the issue of threats to Black lives on campus. I think that one of the things that moved me after the George Floyd was, I just remember thinking, this is enough. I have to say something in this context at Gonzaga. And when I signed off that message, that memo to the community with Black Lives Matter, I got some pushback. I got some letters. I got some trustees and donors and friends of the university, and even some students and parents who said, all lives matter, completely, again, indicating to me how far we have to go to really disentangle that idea. Black Lives Matter isn't taking anything away from any humanity or any other group of people. Indigenous people matter in Spokane, especially. We're surrounded by Indigenous communities, tribal communities. Black Lives Matter does not take anything from brown lives. And we've seen these solidarity networks growing in Los Angeles, the Bay Area, everywhere around us, in Seattle, as coalitions again came together because people were so undone by what had happened again. And it happened again after, and it happened again. And I think that what that means is that it is difficult for a person who's not Black like me and who's brown to imagine what it is to walk, to tell your child, please don't wear that, wear this. Please, when you walk, walk this way. Please don't cross the street over there. Our brown young men also experience the same, but for different reasons and in different categories. There's absolutely no doubt that any of us, women of color walking in unlit spaces, women of color walking down the street in certain areas, are completely unsafe. And I think one of the most powerful things that can happen is that when we're in community and we're together, talking to one another about this and laying out the reality of what we face when we walk in our bodies, whatever size, shape, or form, the color, the stature, how tall you are, can be perceived in lots of different ways, but it is particularly difficult given the history of this country for Black and African American and Afro-Latino people to walk in the public square. I think until we grapple with that, and that Gonzaga is also a public square, it is part of the environment, of the built environment, I don't think we're going to have an easy solution. We can do things like encourage our students to call campus public safety and ask for escorts. We can tell and talk to our students and one another about not walking alone, about walking in groups. And we can also reckon with the fact that we need to portray both sides of the coin. The group that is the star, the group that is the elevated and the hero and, you know, the athlete or the rock musician or the theater person or whomever is out there on the cover of things representing Gonzaga University, but also to recognize that there are many, many, many others who represent Gonzaga University every day just by getting up, getting dressed, walking out, and walking to class, and getting to class and walking across the stage eventually with a degree in hand. So yes, Black Lives Matter.
I'm looking at the time and we've got about 4 minutes before I'm supposed to head into the Q&A. You know, one of the things when I asked the question about Black Lives Matter, I don't know if it was the question I asked or because we've been going for an hour, but about 54 people dropped. And so when you think about we have work to do, you know, is that because 54 people didn't like that question? You know, in the face of this, you know, I've heard you all saying some of you got pushback. You know, I'm encouraging you as an administration to remain courageous because there are several constituents. But if Black Lives Matter, we keep moving forward for the many of the reasons you all just stated. I do want to ask another question because I'm going to have to cut out two. So I'm sort of combining two of them together. And this is probably for Becky and Dr. Gonzalez. And then I want to be sure that by 6:45, I'm able to pose a couple of the questions in the chat, 6:45 at the latest. So this next question is based on previous incidents and concern for the lack of adequate response. And this is, I'm reading what the students wrote. Response on campus to the desecration of the Say Their Name Memorial and the restorative justice process that followed. The question is, how can Black students on campus trust that the university both follows through with meaningful outcomes and is conscious of the emotional labor required from Black students in incidents like this? And you know, the question being too, you know, what's next? It's got to be bigger than town hall. And so, you know, how do you take care of students in these moments? Like there's a lot of tax that goes into this, including me, you know, being the Black moderator. It's tiring after a long day as CEO, but we're willing to bear the tax. But how, you know, again, you know, how can Black students trust the university follows through? Like what's next? And that you're conscious of the emotional labor required from your Black students.
I can go ahead and start with the incident itself. So it was brought to our attention, campus security's attention through the bias team. It was one of those reports that didn't get reported to us directly. So we were kind of already behind the ball, something of the lessons learned that we're going to take note of. So we immediately started the investigation. We used all resources available to us, including our surveillance cameras, card access, the swipe functions, just to see. We were able to follow a couple of people around. Multiple officers worked on this day and night for a few days, and we were finally able to determine who was responsible for stealing one of the signs. You know, Philip specifically met with GSBA and various leaders of cultural clubs to include Faith from BSU. And we discussed how our marginalized students were feeling and during that time. Also, I mean, I know he touched on this, but you know, not just that, but the national racial reckoning, COVID-19, the virtual learning environment, everything, and reaching out and really trying to make sure that they knew that we were there for them and we wanted to know how we could help them. We're continuing to support our Black students by partnering with GSBA and the Security Council. We're revamping that so we can address these concerns quickly, the sense of urgency. I think the second part of your question, I'm sorry, Angela.
Just being conscious of the emotional toll on Black
Yeah.
students, and really in a different way, it shouldn't take Black students to come up with the solutions for Black students for issues they didn't create.
Exactly. Um, yeah, addressing the security issues and service we provide for students is something that we do all the time, but we need to be better. We need to get in front of our students. We shouldn't expect them to have to come looking for us. And of course, in this environment, this new virtual environment, it's a little tougher in some ways, but at the same time, I think we can make it easier. I know that we've been storing up a bunch of safety videos, and that is a library that we can certainly push out to folks, and also on social media seems to be the vessel that everybody prefers. And I'll let Dr. Gonzalez finish the question.
Thank you, Becky, for the reminders too about what happened with the Say Their Name memorial and with the detailing and the investigations that you all conducted. I also want to say that, you know, I know and I'm aware that there were other incidents over the years and that these have a cumulative effect. And I also understand that the rush to restorative justice is often problematic and difficult. And it's especially difficult for communities of color. It's like having a survivor group and asking the perpetrator to go in there and have the survivors tell the perpetrator why, you know, they are so upset or angry. It just isn't done. It's not a good practice, and the restorative justice process isn't about that. But in a way, what it does rely on are participants who agree to engage in a process, and that can be difficult because the outcome can sometimes be, you know, community service for someone that some of us feel should have gotten far more disciplinary action leveled. And disciplinary actions against people in a community are often guided by handbooks and codes of conduct. So one of the things I think that we can all do, can all commit to, is examining those guidebooks and handbooks and ensuring that they're very clear about how a critical incident occurs, a crime occurs, a bias incident, a discriminatory incident occurs, that the process for adjudicating, including the removal of people who perpetrate those incidents, occurs. And I think that part of what happened in the Black Student Union incident and attack, the Zoom attack of November 8, followed on the heels of this other occurrence where the signs were damaged by the sprinkler system, where facilities didn't get the memo or the message, and then also the extensive amount of time the investigation took. And good investigation does take time. We're seeing that right now as a result of November 8. That doesn't mean we can't do things in between. That doesn't mean we can't digest the lessons we've learned and ensure that people of color, students of color, are not supposed to be the healers or offer the solutions to the difficulties, the problems, and the challenges of an institution. We are paid money to do that ourselves, and we will do it. There will be critical incident response team invoked in every incident that occurs. We have to make that promise and pledge, and we have to do it effectively. We're not going to be perfect. We know that. We know that someone will get left out, and we can apologize for that and move on, but we have to do better than we've done. I absolutely believe, you know, that we can get to a point of restorative justice at some point, but we first have to acknowledge the incredibly difficult work that racial injustice requires before we can even begin to talk that talk.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez, and thank you, Becky. We've had a very patient audience, and so we've received a ton of questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and just know, audience, that A lot of these questions the university will have to respond to and post those responses to the website that I'll reiterate again towards the end. But I do want to take some time, it's about 6:45 now, to ask a few questions. And the first one is, since we are a predominantly white institution, what are you actively doing or going to implement to encourage the education of white students on topics of race and racial justice?
You want to go, Kent, or do you want, I can help out with this, but go ahead, Kent.
Okay, so so I think, you know, there's a couple of different ways to talk about this, right? One of those is probably more of a curriculum issue, right? What students receive in terms of their formal learning. I tend to think more in student affairs about what students experience outside the classroom. So we talked even today, for example, about the importance of diversity EDU as being not a solution, but as a way for us to start a conversation, a baseline conversation that then we can follow up with in what we'd call courageous conversations or sustained dialogue. Perhaps not intergroup dialogue as a lot of us think about that, because the composition of the groups really has to be very racially diverse, I think, for that really to work, that sort of dialectic pedagogy, you know, model. But that can be a part of every student's experience in a first-year experience program, for example, or it can be a part of every student's experience in a learning community in a residence hall. I think what students are asking is that these be experiences that aren't opt-out, where students don't easily get to navigate around experiences that are going to be uncomfortable, where we're going to have to sit and examine privilege and talk about issues that frankly are going to challenge those defense mechanisms that Thane mentioned earlier that tend to shut down conversations across difference. I think that can happen in the co-curriculum, but it can't happen exclusively there. And I'll let Dina talk about that, but I think students are saying loud and clear that if this is a priority and important at the institution, it also has to be a part of faculty development, staff development, and it has to be a part of the courses that students are taking at the university.
I'm gonna, before the next person responds, because there's another question that's related in the Q&A, and maybe as the next person responds, you can add this to it. You know, how can this be a university-wide strategic goal, just like rankings for affordability, access to undergraduate research and study abroad? What more can Gonzaga do to be a leader in anti-racism in support?
That no student cannot graduate 4 years on Mother's Day and shake beyond the pandemic Thane's hand and get their degree without taking at least one course that is rich and abundant with equity and inclusion themes. And I think it's our core right now in the core committee and faculty that are looking at threading this content throughout the curriculum. So it's not an either or having a diversity requirement. That's a designation in the core that can be considered. But I think it's more important to embed and braid these learning objectives across the curriculum. And that's what we're doing right now. I think the other piece is with our Center for Teaching and Advising for years now, but we need to build our game up higher, take it to the next level in terms of going beyond the usual suspects and getting all 455 of our faculty bought in, even the STEM areas. Sometimes people say, well, it's not applicable to me because I teach biology or math. It's applicable to everybody, how you contextualize academic content with some of these themes. So it is in the core, because as many of us know, a student can go for 4 years and never go to a DICE program or never do anything outside the classroom and get their degree, but they can't get out of here 4 years with a degree without getting into a classroom and taking courses. So our academic mission is where that needs to be. That's our key leverage point.
President McCall, I think you've tried to jump in a couple of times. As the moderator, I'm going to hand you the mic. Did you have anything to add there?
Well, in a way, I think that colleagues are actually circling around some of these issues. But I think, you know, one of the things that I go back to as well is really spending time in a thoughtful and concentrated way around the question of what is it that at in this regard we as a community truly want for ourselves, because people will put time and energy and effort into the things they care about and into the things that they think are relevant. And so I will say that I think that again, born out of dialogue with our students, efforts such as moving to develop the critical race and ethnic studies program, for example, which is a relatively recent decision that we have made, really is an effort to try to begin gaining some traction in the context of the academic work of the institution. As Dr. Reyes and I remembered from years and years ago, it wasn't technically a core requirement of the university, but it was a core requirement of the college that a former dean instituted as a diversity course requirement. And that quickly morphed into something quite different. And so it isn't the case that the university hasn't historically even looked at ways of thinking about these issues. But some of the work that we have more recently attempted to do, which is to institutionalize the commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, has in part been focused on this question. And we really believe that this is one of those places where if we're to be successful as an institution, it requires institutional commitment. That means it requires the full commitment of faculty, of the deans, of staff, and of students, because it requires that much volume and significance for us to really move. Every other effort has been initiated by small numbers of people, sometimes in isolation and not connected to one another. And so this is demonstrating both the power of inertia and also the demand requirement of really moving the energies of the institution in the right direction.
Go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez.
I mean, this is such an important question. And as I'm looking over the question and answers page, I also see a lot of folks asking, particularly faculty asking questions about what gets in the way of hiring. But one of the key pieces to this is in fact, faculty hiring. It is having the idea that you want your curriculum to look differently. And I think that is afloat, that is working the CTA, but also I think the core curriculum with Professor Molly Ketchmar-Hendricks is underway, investigating ways at least to begin creating designations, right? And of course, then moving, I think, toward full-fledged requirements. But here's the key. The faculty who offer the courses, who share their expertise, who engage the students and create student scholars who are passionate about racial and ethnic studies, who are passionate about critical race studies. The faculty are the key, because it is the faculty who create the job descriptions. It is the faculty who devote 200 hours in any given search to reading the dossiers and the applications, who form the search committee, who present the list of finalists, and a dean who works closely with them, which is why my focus and my interest has been in getting deans who are themselves followers of and believers in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I can say every single one of them is. Of the 5 we've hired, all of them are, but so are the prior deans at the law school, at the School of Business, at the library. All of them are looking into ways to diversify the job descriptions and the way they hire. And we will get it done. We've seen an inching up and a change in the numbers this past year in the time that I've been provost, but it will increase, particularly if the faculty are engaged in this with the students. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy. Serving on a search committee, again, is 200 hours. It is not easy work, but it's what we need to do if what we're going to do is change the curriculum. Because with that expertise, I think the institution itself will kind of begin to offer and address the gaps, which are many. Black faculty are needed at Gonzaga. Native American studies experts and Native American faculty are needed at Gonzaga. Asian American studies experts and Asian American faculty are needed at Gonzaga. Chicanos and Chicanas, a word I've never heard uttered at Gonzaga. I heard it at one of the Act 6 presentations. Raymond and I use it in private behind closed doors. Never, which is stunning because this is something that's very common across the land now. And so these are the metrics, these are the benchmarks we have to set, and that I'm committed to setting. It isn't new work for me. I've done it at 2 other institutions. It's not new work for somebody like Dr. Kelly, who's coming in the door. It's not new work for Dr. Charlita Shelton, who's serving as compliance officer and staying on at Gonzaga. This is the work we do that animates us, and we are going to need the faculty partners, those 170 who signed a petition on the part of the faculty saying, we support Black Student Union and their demands. Now it's time then for us to get to work, because what I'm relying on is all of those folks as partners to ensure that we get faculty looking at Gonzaga, and it's already happening. I signed off on one today, and it is very clear to me that this is something of primary significance to the deans. So you need to know that while we're not going to let go of the idea of the fact that we do have a demographic challenge and issue, we're going to work to heal it and to improve it.
Thank you. So I have 3 minutes left. I was supposed to start closing 2 minutes ago, but President McCullough, I want to give you 60 seconds if you have any last thoughts as a leader of this institution before I close out.
Well, my thoughts are with gratitude and with a commitment that there really is a desire on the part of colleagues who are here, and I know colleagues who would like to be part of this, to sustained, meaningful, and measurable change. And there really is a desire also to do that in a way that does not further labor or weight our students, our community of color within this organization and our communities outside of it. So my hope, my greatest hope, is that we can continue the discussion and we can continue to engage, because while I appreciate and really do understand the significance of why it is that we as administrators, together with colleagues throughout the institution, truly do bear the responsibility here for doing the work, we do need to do that in partnership with our students and with their families, so that we're clearly understanding and we are responding to the issues that are really on their minds and in their experience. And so I seek that kind of relationship so that we can productively and meaningfully move forward, and that there is a sense as a result of confidence that we are making progress. So I'm grateful to you as well, Angela, for moderating this evening. Thank you.
Thank you all. And so as we close out, to the leadership on this panel, a challenge for you to now take those next steps and make it clear and make sure the accountability measures that Dr. Gonzalez just spoke about in the metrics are clear to the communities that want to support and make sure Gonzaga is a welcoming university far beyond the time that the students are here right now. We have a group of Black alumni ready and committed to helping make transformational change. And so know that we stand ready and eager and passionate until this work is just like breathing, how it is for some of us who live in this skin on a day-to-day basis. And so for other next steps for those out there in cyberland to know, as I mentioned earlier, we're recording this webinar and it will be posted to www.gonzaga.edu/BSU response, and it will be posted by Wednesday. The questions that we didn't have time, because there were over 50 questions posed in the Q&A, that we are also hoping to get those responses up ASAP, but give the university a bit of time, because as I said, there were almost 60 questions out there. Watch for the announcement of the next webinar in this series, which will be in the spring semester of 2021. And we're trying to confirm what that will be before Christmas break. I encourage you to follow Gonzaga Diversity on Instagram. It's going to take us as a community. So that's one way to stay in touch, and to check out the website that I mentioned for updates. Gonzaga and its law enforcement officers, as President McCullough and Becky Wilkie already mentioned, continue to investigate the Zoom 8th attack and are ready to take action depending on what is found. And I have to give a shout out to Terry Graham, the BSU advisor, for her work tirelessly supporting students, and to Faith Guy. You know, we want Faith to be able to be a student and graduate, but she's taken on the weight of this. And so shout outs for her courage. And, you know, and to the allies and the rest of the Black Student Union and the board. So thank you to our panelists tonight. Sincere thanks for everyone who also joined us, and, you know, 340 of you have stayed with us this evening. And, you know, as the Zag Nation will continue to, you know, boldly seek change, go forward with progress, go forward with justice. There's a reason we chose Gonzaga, and we want to make it the best place for all to come. So thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it. And that's it. Check out the website. Thanks, everyone.